Welcome to Classical Schmassical, the anti-classical classical music podcast. Tune in every Saturday as we discuss, deconstruct, and dissect what it means to be a musician in the modern world. I'm your host, Alexa Laterno. I use any pronouns, and our guest today is Duck Armstrong.
Hi, I'm Duck. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm from Texas.
Yeah, awesome. So I know you're a guitar player, and my general sort of stock question for any instrumentalist I have on is, what do people get wrong about writing for your instrument? Like, I know that I personally know nothing about guitar, so...
Well, the first thing that immediately comes to mind is that electric guitar in sort of more classical contexts doesn't have to be like the Trans-Siberian Orchestra kind of thing.
Sure.
That's the big thing when I'm like, I play classical music on electric guitar. People are like, oh yeah, like Trans-Siberian Orchestra. I'm like, not quite.
Right.
You can do literally anything on electric guitar, and I've been having a lot of fun exploring all the extended techniques. I really want to do like a Sonic Youth setup with prepared guitar. I just don't currently have a guitar to put screwdrivers in the neck of and stuff.
Sad.
Yeah, maybe soon. But you can do so much, and it functions both as a melodic instrument and a harmonic instrument, and you can combine the two super easily. Any sort of double stops on guitar you can play all 6 strings at once just as easy as you can any of them individually. So I just look at my guitar. It's good. You can do a lot of stuff. I prefer fourths are really easy because it's just the same fret for all 5 out of 6 strings. And really want to play more like chordal chords and quintal chords, even though the stretch on those can be a little tricky.
Sure.
Stacked thirds aren't the easiest to play necessarily for chord voicings, but that's part of the fun of the instrument, is the variety of voicings you can get for the same chord. You can play it 50 different ways and it'll sound totally different because the strings also have different tone, even with the same pitch.
I mean, just like any other string instrument, you can play the same note in a bunch of different ways, but the way that they sound it's so exciting to kind of explore that.
Yeah. Other than that, I just want to see more. And effects are a big thing for me. But I guess that's more of a personal thing. Everyone's got their setup, and not everyone has the same pedals, even if they're all like Tube Screamer clones. Each clone is going to sound a little different.
Yeah, those are words that I understand. As probably one of the better known like electronic instruments, as we're kind of, I feel like the 21st century, a lot of people are kind of building their own instruments, but we do have this sort of a larger tradition for the electronic guitar because of all the sort of poppy rock, less classical, more popular music. What kind of extended techniques do you like have access to? I know you mentioned effects pedals, but like I'm total newbie when it comes to this.
Okay. Yeah. I like for the fall Z-Fest piece, I ended up putting the middle sections into a loop pedal, and then put that loop at the beginning of my pedalboard chain, and then for the last section just played my pedalboard. There wasn't actually any guitar playing happening. I was just using all my effects to alter the tones and make sounds. And like a harmonizer is a big one on the whammy. You can hear the whammy used a lot in like Jack White songs and Tom Morello songs. For example, I also have really fallen in love with using cello bow on electric guitar,
cool.
because the infinite sustain present with a bow. If you pluck the strings on a guitar, of course, the decay is fairly quick, even with like sufficient effects to extend it. The bow takes it to another level.
That's
it's
so
just
fun.
The electric guitar isn't necessarily designed for the bow, though. So I
Sure.
basically only have access to the top E string and the low E string. You can play all six at once, but like trying to play any of the middle strings on a bow of
Right.
its length is not really feasible, as far
Sure.
as I've experienced. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Bow, and then there's an e-bow that is a little magnet and a little handheld thing, and if you set it on a string, it'll make the string vibrate because it's a magnet spinning on the metal.
Oh,
So
whoa.
you can do a lot of really interesting things with that as well. I've had a lot of fun laying my guitar on the floor with an e-bow on the string
Mm-hmm.
and then just use that drone to play the pedalboard off of.
Oh,
But
that
it
sounds
also has some
amazing.
really, really fun, like, sort of legato effects with the e-bow, because it's just, you just hold it on the string and then it's just going to vibrate whatever note it is. But you can do a lot of really fun stuff with that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I want to get into prepared guitar and using like screwdrivers and sort of different materials between the strings for different effects. You can also use a screwdriver on the strings themselves as a
Mm-hmm.
kind of bow. You hear that a lot in like Godspeed You Black Emperor songs.
Okay.
Um, and then I saw a thing the other day about putting a piece of paper under this, in between all the strings at the bridge, to give it this kind of percussive rattle.
Yeah, I've
And St.
I've used a
Vincent's.
similar effect on harpsichord, on a harpsichord piece that I did, and it feels like it would have a similar kind of thing.
Yeah, I
Um,
haven't tried that one out yet. But that, from what I saw, it can really add some extra percussive oomph
yeah,
that
it's
can be missing.
like
Yeah,
really funky, like wobble buzz sound.
yeah,
It was
and the
so
harpsichord
fun.
could use that really well too, I would
Yeah,
imagine.
you could almost because like obviously with harpsichord you don't get any dynamic contrast because you're just plucking the strings, but it almost gave it this sort of sense of a dynamic contrast because like
Hmm.
it was only on some strings, and so you knew that those were going to have more ring and more
Oh,
buzz, and so like in playing in different keys they were like different dynamic. It was a really fun piece to like
that's awesome.
conceptualize.
Yeah, yeah, and that's, I think, similar is what I want to explore is like the different string uses to have different effects. Because like when Dave Grohl talks about the guitar, he said when he first started playing, he thought of each string as like a different drum. Since he was a drummer first,
Yeah,
that the different tone of the strings he would just treat as a separate instrument almost itself.
that's so interesting.
And yeah, that's really neat. That also led me down the rabbit hole of like any stringed instrument can be percussion if you really want it to. Um, like I think the piano functions really well as a
Yeah,
percussion instrument because the hammers, it's
right.
it's right there.
Yeah.
I also want to get some sort of, I guess, the sort of hammers you would use for like hammered dulcimer, or something to that effect.
Okay.
I've
Yeah.
seen some companies make some stuff, but I don't know how much I'm into uh, new things when I could just use things that are already
Right.
made for the same kind of thing. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And I
like
always
I,
feel better about experimenting with like, oh, some player was like going to throw out these old drumsticks, and now I can take them, and like if I destroy them, it doesn't matter because they were going to be thrown out anyways.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
I can do whatever. That's the fun thing with experimental music is like that trash to treasure kind of.
yeah,
It feels the same as like thrifting feels. I
yeah,
just
and if
thrift other people's sounds.
yeah, yeah. Well, and that's exactly, like, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Like
Right. Like,
for
okay.
experimental, it doesn't. It's lost. I don't want to say like the stakes necessarily, but like there's no pressure. If it we don't know how it's
Yeah.
gonna turn out, so if it turns out bad, that's okay too. Like the whole point was to just see what happened, good, bad, or
Yeah.
indifferent.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that like I've come to realize as I've gotten more into experimental music is like making bad music is just as valuable to me personally as making good music because I know it didn't work. And also it doesn't really matter how it sounds. I have fun with it cuz
Yeah,
like
that's the advice every time, or every time when I talk to like new songwriters, for example, it's like you're gonna write a lot of really bad songs.
Oh,
and
yeah.
like that's perfect. That's what you want. Like you can't write a good song, generally speaking, without writing at least a few bad songs, and
Yeah.
and having that like acceptance of like it's okay to be bad, I think is a really important step, even just at the beginning, not even when you get to necessarily experimental, and then it's like leaning into that, like yeah,
Sure.
let's make some noise. I want to see what constitutes music in this
Right.
context. Like if it's just chaotic noise, that's perfectly good too. It's just how do we define music at this point?
Yeah. I think like just accepting the sounds that you're making at any stage of the process. I have one friend who just started composing, and he had the audacity to write a really amazing violin sonata as his first piece and put it on his senior recital and sounded incredible. And I was like, how dare you, first of all, because you didn't suck first.
Yeah.
But like there's something really special, I think, about making music that is either like not very good or not very music, and just appreciating the sounds that you can make. And there's an element of play to it that I find really freeing and really fun.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't know about you. I spent a long time trying to, like, I need to write this specific way, or like,
Oh,
you
yeah.
need to be good. And it's like, at this point, whatever, whatever happens.
Yeah.
But,
Like, I don't want to be good. I want to be vibing. And then once like,
yeah,
then it
and
works.
I was thinking about it the other day because someone, I saw some social media thread that was like, this music is objectively bad. And I realized
Ooh.
at this point, I feel like I've kind of moved beyond like whether something is good or bad. It's more whether do I like this or do I
Yeah.
not like this, or like, is this playing with its tradition in like or interacting with its community and tradition in a meaningful way, or like do these textures appeal to my tastes,
Yeah.
or like are they doing a good job at what they're doing, whether
Yeah.
it's doesn't have to be technically proficient.
Right.
I spent a lot of time playing folk punk music, and that whole genre is centered around people being bad at their instruments, and that's what makes it great, is that
Yeah.
there's no like skill ceiling you gotta shoot for. You just vibe.
Yeah.
It's more
And you think
personal
about,
expression.
like, groups like I'm just thinking the Portsmouth Sinfonia, where they have this famous album where they all switched instruments, professional musicians who've trained for years, and they just wail on it and see what happens. And it's so fun. And I feel like that's an example of a really effective piece of music, because it
Yeah.
sets out to say, let's see what happens, and it's not going to be good. And then it isn't. And that's the expectation going in, and you go
Yeah.
in, and anybody can listen to that. I feel like it's one of those really cool things where, like, anybody, doesn't matter what your musical background or training or appreciation or whatever is,
Mhm.
you listen to that and you think, this is an interesting concept. And then you hear it and you go, yep, that's how I thought it would sound. And
Yeah.
it's really fun, and it sets out to be fun. And like,
Yeah.
it does that. And like, it doesn't sound good. No one thought it would sound good. Like, they play Also
Yeah.
Sprach, and those trumpets are really trying, and they are failing, and that's okay.
Yeah,
And
that's
like, it's so fun.
Yeah.
Like, good and bad. I really like some really bad music. Like, it's just trash. It's trash, and like, I feel fine with it being bad. And like, I don't know, I have a good time with it anyways.
Yeah. There was a band from Denton, I really wish I got to experience them more, called Problem Dog. And Problem Dog was like a 15 to 25 piece improvised noise band.
Mm-hmm.
And so they generally, from what I understand, didn't have concrete songs. It would just be like they would just start with someone riffing on whatever, and then everyone would do whatever, and their live shows would be whoever can come to the show to play songs would, with whatever instruments they had. So they were a lot of like toy pianos and like little keyboards and guitars and all this almost nonsense. And that's what made it so great, was that it was just absolute chaos. And when they're recorded, their records are just absolute chaos on tape, and it's incredible. And they got the power turned off at a venue in Denton because they were booked as a jazz band.
Ooh.
And so when 25 people pour on that stage with this variety of instruments, and then they start, and it's just absolute uncontrollable chaos, the sound guy did not really like that.
Yeah. Be nice to your sound people, folks.
Yeah, because I don't know, being a jazz band or labeling it as a jazz band is kind of not entirely accurate, so I can understand the frustration, but that band, I think, is one of the most Denton things I've ever heard about.
Yeah, that's fun. Like my one of my mom's friends talks about jazz and is like, oh, it's cool because it improvises, and I'm like, but other things improvise too, and like, so that might be one of the reasons. They're like, yeah, it's improvisatory, ergo jazz, which like, no, not exactly.
It's a little bit more than that, and depending on, especially from my brief experience in jazz, there are a number of threads, and depending on which thread you participate in, your expectations are going to be very different.
Yeah.
Because I really love Ornette Coleman and like free jazz. But that's the like much weirder cousin of like bebop and that sort of stuff. And I just haven't explored. But like do kind of whatever. There are limitations to free jazz. It's just we're just having a good time. We're just vibing. Whatever that may be.
Yeah. Kind of I can't riffing off of the sort of improvisation. I don't know. I couldn't think of the other word. Riffing off of the like talking about improvisation. I know that you have often interacted with graphics scores, and I'm curious as to how you go about like when you receive them, like reading them, and is there sort of an improvisatory element, sort of like a guided because I haven't had much experience working with graphic scores. I've made a couple, but haven't had them performed, so like what even is that exercise? And I'm just really curious as to how you go about it.
Making graphic scores and performing them, I think, are actually kind of two I guess it makes sense as opposite ends of the spectrum, but like interpreting I'm when I'm making graphic scores, I'm thinking about my creative intention, but I know that it's not going to be probably anything like that, so expectation sort of goes out the window. But there's I'm gonna mess this up. Cornelius Cardew did this gargantuan graphic piece treatise that's a lot of geometry and that sort of thing, and there was no instructions included with treatise. If you want to know what Cornelius thought about the score, he released a set of his notes while he worked on it. But those aren't even full instructions. It's just kind of talking about the process of making treatise more than anything. And at one point he says something to the effect of like, there's a difference in doing whatever you want and reading the notation and then doing whatever you want. So I thought that was really interesting. I thought, well, the first time I did a graphic score was like this. I just drew lines on the staff. I wanted to maintain that connection of like, okay, this is kind of how Western standard notation functions. Let's just take the time out of it and hard pitch out of it, because realistically Western notation is just telling you how long to play a note for,
right?
So I tried to like step outside of that a little bit, but stay enough with the staff, because then it says it's music is kind of how I thought about it. It kind of legitimizes the process when you keep a familiar element in. Because that's kind of the, I don't want to say game necessarily, but kind of the game is you're taking visual material to then be translated into musical material. And so picking like your symbols and what sort of things mean what can be an integral step. There's also using strictly visual material to then be translated after the fact without any sort of in or consistent sort of internal logic. Both are very fun, but trying to find new symbols to express more conventional ideas, it can also be fun because they may not interpret those new symbols the same way, even if it's in the context of more familiar things. Oh, where was I going with that?
It's all good. It sort of reminds me of the project that we did this last fall with Z Festival, making this sort of score game affectionately called Shrimp Atonement, which is a long story. But I know, so sort of a long, just brief explanation is, so it's sort of like the game Foldy Foldy Draw Draw or Exquisite Corpse, if and there's a whole chain of people and everybody is just reacting to sort of what happens before them and what we're given. And I had one where I was reacting to a visual material. I don't remember if it was a visual material that you made or somebody else in our group made, but playing a piece of visual art as it was being drawn and picking up my flute and saying, I'm going to play that, was really fun. And I had no idea what I was doing, but it was also really freeing because there was no wrong way to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, what?
Yeah, I think I was drawing made up still life. I thought some sort of gesture drawing would be really good for the prompt, but then I had a hard time keeping my pen down, and it just turned into a still life of like a skull and like candles and rocks. I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's the best part about sort of the visual material. Like that first graphic score I did 4 sequences, I got to be in the room when the flute ensemble that performed it first saw the score, so I got to see their faces right out the gate, and they had never seen anything like that before, and so it was really fun, like with the what is happening here? And then so they ran through the piece once just because I didn't have any instructions at that point, and then afterwards we talked about the piece, and then like, so wait.
Right.
And I think at the very least as like some sort of learning exercise, like that's got to be really fun because we're so used to being given music and said play this as it's written. There is some degree of interpretation and improvisation, but in my experience it's been a lot of, all right, here's your score, do that, whatever that is. So having the graphic score be like, do this. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
You know? What does that mean to you? It could be anything. There's no wrong answers. Like that's, I found definitely that freedom of like, oh yeah, do whatever.
Right. Yeah, the first piece I was ever given to play as a graphic score, I distinctly remember this. It was a page torn out of Finnegan's Wake, and then a watercolor Weeping Angel from Doctor Who drawn on it. And I was like, I don't understand how this is a piece of music. It's pretty. It's cool. I was like freshly 18 years old. Like, I don't understand what you want me to do here. And getting that piece, I don't think we ended up performing it, but getting that piece to a point where like I was happy with it, the composer was happy with it, was really, really interesting because I like, especially with it being sort of an objective piece of art, because like it looked like this angel, and I was like, I feel like I have an easier time of interpreting like shapes and lines and flowy colors versus here's a picture, play it. But that just might be my own personal like lack of experience with graphic notation.
I mean, I still feel very much a baby in the whole world, really. But I really like lines and shapes and colors. I'm still working on them, but I have a sketchbook that's just, okay, circles are percussion, squares are chords, lines are melodies. Go.
Cool.
Because that it translates pretty well I mean, there's personal interpretation, especially like the use of color. Not everybody has synesthesia, and everybody with synesthesia perceives different sounds as different colors. So there's not like any amount of universality to that. So that can be really fun. Like with one of those, I was like, yeah, the magenta, that's got to be like a dominant chord, you know. And then I had someone else play it, and it was definitely not that like strong dominant pull. And I was like, oh, this is weird, but also perfect. That also that's exciting.
That's so interesting, because I definitely feel like I don't think I have synesthesia. If I do, it's quite mild, but I do have a very strong like color association with sounds. So like, I don't know what that, take of that what you will. I have a very strong color association with sounds, and I know like I've been in comp lessons before with traditionally notated music where like a comp teacher was saying, oh, like playing on the piano, like here's the chord you have, but if you change this one note in the tenor, here's what that would sound like. And in my head I was like, nope, that changed chord, it's too blue. And I was like, what do you mean it's too blue? And so like I definitely feel like I use this color association in my traditionally notated music, and it's so cool to like think about the different interpretations when it's a very literal like magenta chord. Do it.
And you can, I mean, even with the voicings like that, I had such a hard time in ear training, because it just, the different intervals have different moods, and even if you're playing a major chord in the second inversion, it doesn't always necessarily feel super major, and I guess that's the whole point of inversions. But it makes identifying chords very difficult.
Definitely.
But then there's also the whole like with the, say that it was Finnegan's Wake with the Weeping Angel, like that's visual art, right, and it's being treated as visual material for musical material. And so like whenever we can do shows again, I'm really excited to put graphic scores in shows, because like I put that 4 sequences up. We had friends at the coffee shop next to the store I worked at that wanted art, and I was like, well, I'll put the score up, and I like made instructions, and then everybody was like, you're putting music on the wall as art? I was like, yeah, I mean, it's a graphic score, it's visual material, it's just both. And it someone went to the shop and said that just like spoke to them, and they thought it was the coolest thing they'd ever seen, and was like,
that's amazing.
I just put up my weird music on the wall thinking it was just kind of fun, and then the person had a like meaningful interaction with it that I just didn't ever expect. And so it's been really fun to like, okay, so if this is strictly musical material, like that's cool, but how can we also make it function as visual art? And so far I feel like so much of that is context, especially in like modern art. It is art because we say it is, so it doesn't necessarily need any sort of defining quality to be defined as art. Like I know a lot of people talk trash, but like the banana duct tape to the wall, someone said that's art, therefore it is. It's, for me, it's that simple. We treat it as such, it is. And that I guess kind of extends from like the whole fight with like 433 and John Cage's use of silence and stuff. It's like, well, we listen to it as if it is music, so it is. There's that's it. Debate
like
over.
It's all made up anyways.
So, and that's been such a fun, everything's just made up, so whatever.
I've been having that feeling a lot. I've been writing a lot about like the sociology behind identity and compositional voice, and so like the idea of the social constructs of music are very forefront in my mind, and I'm like, it really is all made up. Like we looked at those, like pitches are not made up. Pitches exist.
Yes.
Calling them A through G, totally made up.
Yes. Sharps
and flat, made up. Chords, what? No. Chord inversions, that's so fake. Like, none of it has any meaning. So if we're treating it like music, it's, I totally agree with what you're saying. Like, if it's art, it's the way that people interact with it that makes it music or makes it art. Or and
Exactly.
so like it's not art, maybe it's not art to you, but that doesn't mean that it's not a valid piece of art for somebody else, and intrinsically that would make it art if it's art for anyone.
Yeah, and like that, I had that conversation regularly when I worked at an art store. People I would meet would say, you know, like pick your modern artist of choice, whoever it may be, and people were like, man, that's not art. Like I could do that. It's like, well, one, you should. That would be really fun. It's a great experience. Two, like you hadn't yet, and for a lot of that, it exists now as it is because someone else already did it.
Yeah.
Before a lot of those folks, it wasn't quite like that, you know. And it's all just made up. We only do the things we do because of what we've been exposed to or taught or learned, you know. That's it. It's an illusion. But it's also like a community, and sometimes I feel like there's some sort of greater sort of thing. Like I think it Arthur Danto talks about like the art world as this sort of separate thing from us. Like we exist in it and we create from it, but art as we know it exists outside of us. These things, these advancements would have occurred no matter what. It just who tapped into that at that time first to do those things. But from what I read, it seemed kind of inevitable that these results would happen. And that leads to like a sort of, is it divergent evolution where you reach the same goal without actually being connected?
Convergent evolution.
You're right. Words are hard. Also just made up.
I get, words also, language, what even is it?
Made up.
But
we didn't have written language till like 2,000 years after spoken language, so spelling
what even?
Doesn't matter.
Garbage.
We'll reach the same goals, and like I found that like going to a couple noise shows at my local DIY venue prepared me very, very much so for like contemporary classical music and experimental music, even though the communities crossed over sometimes, like, but from what I understand and observed, a lot of those folks didn't come from classical backgrounds. They came to noise from having varied backgrounds, you know, in electronics and guitars. And I remember one band had the microphone and they were holding it with their teeth, screaming into a table of pedals for a number of minutes. And it was one of the greatest shows I've ever seen. Because that was such a neat thing. I had never at that time seen anything like it, and was like, wait, they're setting up their pedals on the table? Wait, what's happening? Oh, there are like synthesizers up there too. Oh, wow. Oh, what is this? This is great.
And like, I always feel like this constant like conflict with like, I feel like I'm making the music that I want to make, but at the same time, I feel like the whole culture of contemporary classical means that much of the music that's being made in the genre is music that like only like trained musicians can appreciate, or like only people who've gone to a conservatory can understand. And like, I don't want that, but like, I don't know how to bridge that gap or say, hey mom, here's this cool piece that I've written, and have her not go, oh, that's interesting. Like, thanks, Mom. And I know that it's not anything, like, malicious, and she's not purposefully not getting it.
Yeah.
But, like, that's where I'm at. Where it's like,
Yeah, there's something to be said about the, like, baby steps into something.
Yeah.
Like, the other day at work, I had put on Godspeed You Black Emperor record, which is great for a retail store, by the way. And two of the songs are built on drones. And about 5 minutes into the first drone, my coworker was like, what is that noise? I was like, oh, that's the music. And she's like, this is music? Like, you need to change it. And I obliged, because I don't remember the steps that led me to appreciating like drone, you know, where it is just 20 minutes of the same pitch.
Right.
But there's needs to be some sort of build up, you know. Not everybody can just dive into everything. It's just, we've also, the like contemporary classical has gotten very niche. If it wasn't already niche, I feel like it just keeps getting more hyper niche. By its very nature of, you know, if you're experimental, you're trying new things. That
Right.
depending on context, of course, using the same experiments that have already been done isn't necessarily that. So the boundaries are constantly being pushed, and with the age of the internet, it's moving very fast.
Right.
And like, I feel like I still don't know a lot of what's going on, like actual contemporary. I feel like my education and studies kind of stop at the 60s. Like Theory 4 was like, yeah, and you know, John Cage exists, semester over.
Right.
I was like, oh man, there is a lot of stuff after that too.
Right.
Like many things, and it's just hard to find all the stuff, because there's a lot. And
I was really lucky. In my undergrad, the comp majors were required to take post-World War II music history, which really led us all the way up to, I think the latest piece we listened to was like 2012 or something, and it was I took the class in 2018, so like not shabby. And we like, it wasn't all experimental, or it wasn't all well, first of all, we didn't do it chronologically because our professor said this doesn't really make sense to do chronologically, because this is kind of the point when classical music went poof, and everybody went off in different directions. So we sort of did it by like conceptions, and we had like a unit on like world music, which that one's not a great example, but like the use of gamelan in classical versus you know, in a cultural setting, and how that can work, or the use of synthesizers, or hardware versus software creating the same things, and it was or even artificial intelligence with like Emily Howell, the composer, who is a code, who's just, that's a piece of code that this other composer said, I'm gonna make a composer, and then Emily Howell has written pieces, and it's a piece of software. And like, so it was really cool, but at the same time, it was a singular class. One class, you get one. Here is all of the music of the past 80 years.
And that's, I mean, it's really true, I guess, for all eras, but I feel like it's a little bit easier going through like the composers of like the classical period. Like we have kind of a general canon of like where Western music was happening and like who was doing what, but
there's a sort of a clear trajectory from like polyphony to like ornamentation becomes form, becomes expression, and then you get to about the 40s and everything goes, remember how that was clear? Sorry.
Bye.
Which I think is cool. It allows for more personal expression, but it does make it harder to study.
Yeah, because there's so many threads, and everybody, because it's kind of this may be my assumptions here, but I feel like it's more of a widespread conversation now than it ever has been, whereas before it was very centralized on like, all right, it's these people with certain amount of patrons in this very small area of Europe are doing this, and now it's a global conversation, and that's super exciting. It just has helped with the like isolated communities, because like all my favorite bands are from the Midwest, where they were just weird kids in their room listening to records, making songs, like and that leads you into some really fun directions. Man, I want to go to the Midwest.
But and then like when you're in a class where you're listening to like we listened to Pinball Wizard on the same week that we listened to Kanye West's opera. It was like, well, that's a lot to take in.
That's a huge gap. And I know at least from the professors I've known that are teaching like music appreciation classes, like they're trying to cover a lot of ground really fast, like especially in the pop world, because of those like tight-knit communities where they're influencing each other and developing their own sort of aesthetics very fast. It's like, was it before it was shoegaze, it was the scene that celebrates itself, which is kind of a mouthful.
Right.
But that was because they were all in the same bands playing all the same shows. Like, it was this super tight-knit community. Everybody was making their art better with each other. And I think that's really neat. But I think that's kind of how most communities actually work. It's just for shoegaze, they just like called it that for its descriptor.
Kind of moving, like, going with that, how do you personally relate to different genres in your own musical practice?
I love guitar music. I really do. There was a meme I saw a while back that was like, contemporary classical composers are just prog with more violins, and that's kind of where I want to be. There have been a number of pieces where I'm like, yeah, these strings are sick, but also I would love like drums on this. It doesn't always actually need drums, but I am a sucker for strings and drums.
I saw a TikTok just this morning that a drummer had made and was like, stitch this with whatever piece you want to put with this, and some organist played like Bach but faster than it should have been, and it was so cool. It had like, I don't know, like 200 views, but all the comments were like, this is so cool, why don't we hear more of this? And I was like, yeah, why don't we hear more of this? We should have organ and drum set music. So cool.
You can do so much with the organ too, and I barely know anything about organ music except that you can do anything with an organ if you really wanted to. Yeah, I think generally, I guess kind of the way I've been thinking about it lately is like my tradition is more tied to like the punk community, I guess, in the broadest sense of the word, because like I spent time volunteering at a DIY space, and all my friends are in punk or punk adjacent bands. I myself wish I was in an emo band, but we still are in the post-punk game. I do want to add more synths and more dance bits because I've been listening to a lot of New Order lately. But more like lay on my bed with headphones New Order than like at the club New Order. So I feel like I'm missing half of
the pandemic like the intended mood.
Yeah.
Your bed is the club.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I feel like I've spent a long time treating music as sort of a job. Like I really like listening to new things that I have no idea about. And so like at this point, pretty much there's no music I've really been like, no, this sucks. It's like, even if I don't necessarily interact with its community or tradition, there's still things to be said about it. Like there's this, I guess it's sort of new, they're like a couple Gen Z kids playing meme jazz, and it's just all memes, and it's unlike anything I've ever seen. Like I don't have the connection here, you know, to like really understand, but this is sick, and y'all are really good at what you're doing, and I love that. Because there's so much new things to explore, and like who knew that weird internet memes and jazz would be so good. But I guess that's kind of where we're at in the age of the internet anyway.
I like the internet has been so big in genre creation too, and like not even beyond just like inspiring things because of the like memes of internet culture. Like you can find people with the most hyper specific music interests that you just like, it's such a good community. But like I definitely get what you're saying with like music being sort of a full-time job. Like I have people find it really odd, non-musician friends find it really odd that I don't listen to music when I'm studying, and I'm like, I can't, because when I have music on, that's what I'm thinking about. Because I am a musician, it means, I think it means more, or it can mean more, and like
Mhm.
focusing when it's on is absolutely impossible. Versus like sometimes I'll put on a podcast and I will not be listening to the podcast, but there's enough background noise in there that like it's not taking away my attention nearly as much as it would be if I had like some like lo-fi beats for studying or whatever. Like no, I
Yeah.
can't do that.
Still listening. Uh,
Yeah.
and also in I spent a lot of time like writing music in like the coffee shop or bar area.
Hmm.
So I found with music, if I'm working on something and listening to music, whatever I'm trying to dictate is gonna just move to whatever key I'm listening to.
Oh wow.
um, so that can be really fun. All the pieces I wrote up there have a lot of weird key changes and modulations, and I didn't realize why until later.
Yeah.
But it can be a really fun game to like hear a song and then put on a different song in a different key and then try and sing the first song without
Yeah.
it moving. But my ear is bad, so that may not be a fun game for skilled ear people. But
That's
I have
fair.
a lot of fun.
That's
Like,
fair.
okay, this my inner ear needs to like stay where it was instead of
Yeah.
just jumping around. Because
I mean, I think that's also awesome for ear training too. Like, I've had to sing a lot of really dissonant choir music, which really forced my ear to get very good. But even so, I'm sitting at like that sounds awesome. I would love that game.
yeah,
It's the stupid musician game, but it sounds so fun.
yeah, and I wanted to do so many sight singing games because like when I was doing ear training at the college, like I would whoever I was next to, I would just be following them. So my professor had me sit next to our highest soprano in the class because I can't get up there.
Yeah.
I wanted to very regularly and would crash and burn because my range is not developed for that.
That's such a music teacher thing to do. Not gonna single you out. I'm not gonna make you do it alone, but I'll put you next to someone who you do not have their voice type.
Yeah, it worked. I mean, it was hard, and I guess that's part of weird bit, but there's so much like exclusivity in music education of like you have to be at this level to do this, and like yeah, having my friend the soprano next to me made it really hard. It also like we at the end of the 4 semesters we only had 5 students left. We started with like a 30-person class,
Yeah.
and the way it wasn't always like the course itself. Like a big thing was like applying it to your instrument, and there were a couple other folks that like played guitar, for example, and our professor was like, you need to the piano is your calculator, and was like, yes, familiarize yourself with the piano, like this is important, but also do what we're doing on your home instrument so
Yeah.
that it actually like sticks.
Yeah.
And that was really hard for a lot of folks because it's like, especially with guitar, this isn't music theory and ear training aren't necessarily at the forefront of when you're learning guitar. It's, or at least for me, it was here's 4 chords. Now I have a song. I've written a song. Here we go. I only know these 4 chords, but here we go. So it was really fun to apply that.
Yeah. Definitely.
But it also feels like with trying to get back to the main question, feel like a visitor everywhere almost, like
Yeah.
because it, like I said, my tradition closer aligns to like the DIY punk thing, of just like anybody can do this. You want to do this, do. One of my heroes, Jeff Rosenstock, with Bomb in the Music Industry, did a tour that was the Bring Your Own Band tour. It was just Jeff, and if you learned the song on your instrument, you would play the set with him.
Amazing.
And I just thought that was the coolest thing I had ever seen.
Yeah.
And like they didn't sell shirts; it would bring a shirt, and we'll spray paint one for you in the parking lot.
That's awesome.
All the shows are all ages, only $5. Like they refused to play any shows that were 21 and up,
Yeah.
and they refused to play shows that cost more than $5 because everyone can do $5, but like these $15, $25, $30 shows are not accessible for everybody. and that
Yeah.
was the key. And so I guess that's where that I feel like that's my tradition is that's what I want. That's where I
Yeah.
come from. It's like
Yeah.
anyone can do this. Our stage is just a rug
Yeah.
with a PA on it. There's no like difference, you know, we are ultimately equal. And like all my favorite shows, one band set up not on the stage, well the drums were on the stage, but everyone else set up their amps around the rest of the venue.
Yeah.
And so the audience stood in the middle of all of the amps and instruments and stuff, so depending on where you angled your ears you could hear something a little different.
Yeah.
And it was just this really really cool experience. I definitely stole for some of our shows after that,
For sure.
because it also helped, like my band practiced in a little square room and we were each in one corner, so lining up on a stage to perform was always very different, because that's not how we practiced. You know, where are our visual cues to each other if we're in a line?
Right. Definitely.
And so I've been thinking about that the last couple of days, especially of like, okay, how do we bring that sort of thing to like more orchestral contexts, you know, like
Right.
I was talking to my partner last night about like doing like a DIY orchestra that I guess would be in spirit kind of like Cornelius Cardew's Scratch Orchestra, on like, I don't want just strings and brass and woodwinds and percussion. Like I want guitars, I want basses, I want every instrument that you have and want to play, and even not even just instruments, so like dancers and painters, and like have this, ideally speaking, this community of creatives all working together to make art that is for everybody everywhere. It's just like we were talking about earlier, like how do you prepare like general audiences for the sort of weird things that I'm into currently. There's how do you get that so where it doesn't have to be that like, this would make a great horror soundtrack, so keep that in mind. It's like, well, if I'm writing a horror soundtrack, absolutely.
Thank you.
But
however, right.
If it's just general new music, then maybe not. But then also, is it a chicken egg situation? Are we using experimental techniques for horror soundtracks, so that's why it's associated? Or is it just experimental techniques suit themselves to horror soundtracks? I don't know.
Yeah. Horror soundtracks, social construction. That's but no, what you were saying before with like not playing any shows that are over 21 or you know, over $5 kind of brings me to what I know we wanted to talk about as well, which was issues of accessibility in the music world, and accessibility and inclusivity as well. And so what do you see as being the main challenges in those areas?
Well, especially for more like orchestral and classical contexts, I don't even know if ivory tower is the right word, but this like sort of baked in assumption of elitism we need to somehow deconstruct. And like a lot of people are doing a lot of really good work on that front. Like I know our Fort Worth Symphony Orchestra does the concerts in the garden, so they get out of the hall and are in the garden playing. For a lot of the concerts, it's like movie scores and like pop music. They had a Journey night last year for it. And so like that sort of thing where we're trying to remove that barrier, because the assumption of like classical music is this like high class, like very fancy sort of thing, like
high art, like
high art and low art, made up, totally made up, and
also not useful for anybody.
At no point has that ever served anyone.
Right. Like some things that are socially constructed are useful, but that is fully not one that I think has ever really benefited a single person. Yeah.
Because like even say like outsider art, you know, is a whole genre of people that haven't interacted with a tradition, from what I understand. Like you're given the tools to do a lino cut, but you've never seen another lino cut before or been told how to do that. So then you do whatever that looks like. And so like I think that's really important, but that doesn't make it low art. That's just not interacting.
It's just different. Yeah.
Yeah. I just don't know.
Yeah.
There are a lot of other people doing a lot of things to help that. Like I said, like with the, at least for Fort Worth, you know, the Concerts in the Garden are a good step. But also this sort of Western notation thing doesn't help either. Like, because I've spent most of my time in like the punk and more rock communities, reading Western notation is not common. And that, I think that's fine. That's totally great. You don't have to know how to read music to make good music whatsoever.
Yeah.
It's just there's this like preconceived thing that like there is some sort of superiority to reading Western notation.
Right.
Even though it's very much made up. Very, very made up and not really important at all.
And it started because of some guy's hand. Like, what are we even doing?
Yeah, it's a lot more fun, you know, for learning purposes to like sing along, you know, and figure it out like that way. There are benefits to being able to write down music, of course. But this...
Right. But I remember when I first started playing flute, and like my mom's a musician as well, so she like played saxophone in high school, went on to do visual art, but like she knows music. She can still play some piano, play some sax, play some trumpet. Like she knows knows what's up. And I was playing, and I'd been playing for I don't know, maybe like 6 months, enough to where I knew like all the notes in the scale, but like it was like I was not super experienced, and I just distinctly remember playing this game that like blew her mind, where like she would pick a song off of her iTunes and like play it, and I would take a couple seconds and start playing along. And I don't have perfect pitch, so it took a second to figure out which key, and it was a little trial and error. But then like I didn't need to see the music. I know how the song goes, and like I could hear it well enough to just be like, yeah. Or sometimes she'd put on a song and be like, no, that's in C sharp. We're not doing that. Like, I'm a child. What are you doing? But like, to me, it was a very natural expression to not have to read the music all the time and to play along and play things that I thought sounded cool. And that's how I started composing, was instead of playing along with things that were already written, I played along with things that were just existing in my head. And that's sort of how it all began. Like, it was never sitting down at the piano and trying to write things down and like see how they fit. It was just like, I have a melody stuck in my head, and I would like to not have it stuck in my head, so let's see if writing it down gets it out.
Yeah. And I mean, basically similar. I learned 4 chords, started writing songs because I had words and melodies, and was like, okay, well, let's just throw these on here. Like, does this feel right? Is this like expressing more than anything else? It wasn't. I don't even remember when I got into writing things down. Now I love writing things down, except it's taken a much weirder turn with graphic.
Sure.
But there's something like pure and beautiful. Same with like written language. It existed way after spoken language. Notation didn't exist until much after we had already been singing songs.
Yeah.
Like this is a fundamental part of our humanity, is to make music.
Yeah.
And so like, writing down's great. I have a lot of fun writing things down, but not everybody does, and that's totally cool. We just need to...
Yeah.
I wish I had the answers.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel that same thing linguistically, too, because, like, we learn the alphabet pretty early on. It's kind of a thing that you learn as a child. Surprise. And, like, I have since learned the Greek alphabet as well, because I thought it was fun. I learned it when I was, like, I don't know, 7 or 8. And part of it was because, like, I have Greek heritage, and so, like, I engaged with that. But then I was like, oh, learning new languages is really cool. And so I learned how to, like, read Cyrillic, and now I'm working on the Georgian alphabet, which is also phenomenal. If you don't know what the Georgian alphabet looks like, you should 100% Google it. It is beautiful and also deeply confusing to me as somebody who's just starting to learn it. But, like, they're just different. When you think about it, they're just different notation systems. It's exactly the same thing. It's these new made up squiggles that don't have any intrinsic meaning, and they tell you what sounds to make. And it's exactly the same as like graphic notation versus Western notation versus other forms. Guidonian hand, even if we want to go back to that, like I think Guidonian hand's very cool. Did not mean to diss it by saying like, oh, this whole system's based off some guy's hand. I just think it's funny.
Yeah.
But like there's all these different ways, and like I don't think any of them, I think the more that you know, in some ways the better off you are, because you have the more means of like making your music a reality or making your art a reality.
Yeah, because you have the vocabulary for it.
Whether exactly.
It's whatever that vocabulary is.
Yeah, in the same way that like English does not have a sound, but Georgian does. There's a letter for that. If I want to make a I can't use the English alphabet. I can describe it to you, but if I'm in Georgian, I can just write, and then that's that. And you know what I'm talking about. And so everything's just good for different purposes.
Yeah, and that leaning into that sort of thing, I think, could be really beneficial. Of like, yes, this is what we do for these contexts.
For these contexts, exactly.
Yeah, is this the expectation? Like, if we're going to see, you know, someone perform a classical piece, there are certain expectations of what that'll be. That was also my favorite part about the Scratch Orchestra, was they would do covers.
Nice.
Except it would be one performer would bring a single piece of material from the piece that they were covering, whether it's a line of music, a page of music, any sort of bit, but it had to be a single fragment. And then everyone else would fill in their parts based on what they thought it was supposed to be, either from memory or not.
Cool.
So like for example, if they were put on the program, they were going to play Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, of course one player was probably playing the main melody there, but everyone else was just whatever they thought was supposed to be there. And so I'm sure that led to some frustrated audiences expecting, you know, a direct performance of Beethoven's Fifth, and then everyone just kind of did what they thought it was supposed to be.
There's somebody that just keeps going down minor thirds, and they're like,
yeah. So fun.
That sounds so fun.
I want to do something like that, but I've heard, or from what I've read, it's really effective as like a teaching exercise, you know, to do something like that, where like, okay, you know, we're gonna unleash the gates here, and now that you know the gates can be open, move forward into whatever you want.
Be free, my children.
Yeah.
That's so awesome.
I guess that's what it comes down to, is like freedom and accessibility, and then like the preconceived notions on certain instruments can be not always fun, you know. For example, I love the viola so much, and the viola as a stringed instrument gets trashed on constantly.
Much hate and for what?
For what? Oh, it's a little reedy in the low end. Like, that's great. I think that's like, it's so warm though.
Yeah, like you ever heard a reed instrument? Like,
oh, it's too reedy. Do you just hate all reed instruments?
Yeah.
All right. Goodbye woodwinds and all saxophones. Never again, because the viola. That's stupid. You can do so much. And like
children as young, I think it's like 4. I was just reading this study, but like really young kids are like, oh yeah, the flute's a girl's instrument and a trumpet's a boy's instrument. It's like, why is this a thing?
Well, I'll tell you, I tried to join band in middle school, and I wanted to play drums. And as it turned out, I got put on flute in 7th grade instead of drums, and I was very frustrated. Yeah. Because flute and percussion are not necessarily antithetical, but kind of opposite ends of the spectrum.
Of the sort of school concert band, that's pretty much opposite ends. They're even physically distanced in the room. Like,
yeah. So I had a bad time, and I quit band. because that's not what I wanted, and I feel like honestly a lot of that was the like external pressure from my peers who already hated my guts because I existed.
Yeah.
Playing flute just added gasoline to that fire.
Sure.
So I don't play flute very well anymore.
That's fair enough.
But that's sort of that's made up nonsense, and
Yeah.
I hate that.
Yeah.
And I hate that that's still prevalent. You know, you have to be a bigger person to play tuba. I mean, if you can carry the tuba, play the tuba. If you can carry it, get it. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's a big instrument.
And people will say, well, it's because of the lung capacity, but like, you need more air to play the flute. So like, what is this really about?
Mm-hmm.
And
mm-hmm.
yeah.
Lung capacity. Yeah.
Imagine needing to blow into your instrument. This is brought to you by the percussion gang.
That was I had so many issues when I was first writing for any sort of wind instrument. I was like, yes, I forget other instruments need to breathe. They
yes.
literally need to breathe.
Yeah, we will die.
Yeah, sadly. You can't just have a slur that goes on too long. You gotta be cognizant of people's breathing for these things. Right. I was like, that's so weird. I can just pluck on my guitar until forever. Right. Until my body gives out.
Yeah. Well, I really, really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much to Duck for joining us here at Classical Schmassical. If you enjoyed the show, there is plenty more where that came from, so do make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you would like to continue the conversation on guitar, visual art, genre, or accessibility across different contexts, do join the Discord linked in the description, or visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/classicalschmassical. That's Schmassical, Schmassical. What a tongue twister. And remember, as always, stay classy and questionably classical.